In 1973, a retired NASA engineer named Arthur Rudolph received a letter that would shatter his carefully constructed American dream. For nearly 3 decades, he had been celebrated as one of America's greatest rocket scientists, the man who helped put Neil Armstrong on the moon. He lived in a comfortable suburban home, collected prestigious awards, and was hailed as a hero of the space program. But the letter came from the Department of Justice, and it contained a single, devastating question. Mr. Rudolph, were you a Nazi? The answer was yes, and Arthur Rudolph was not alone. Welcome to World War IIpedia, where we uncover the buried truths and hidden secrets of World War II that the history books conveniently left out. Today, we're diving into one of the most morally compromising operations in American history. A story so shocking that it remained classified for decades, and so disturbing that even today, most people have no idea it ever happened. Hidden beneath the gleaming success of America's space program lies one of the most morally complex operations in U.S. history. Between 1945 and 1959, the American government secretly recruited over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians in a classified program called Operation Paperclip. These weren't just any Germans. Many were dedicated Nazis, SS officers, and accused war criminals who had worked directly for Adolf Hitler's war machine. The man who designed the rockets that terrorized London became the father of America's space program. The doctor who froze prisoners to death in concentration camps became a pioneer of aviation medicine. The chemist who developed nerve gas using slave labor became a consultant for American pharmaceutical companies. They walked through customs with false identities, their Nazi pasts scrubbed clean by U.S. intelligence agencies, desperate to beat the Soviet Union in the emerging Cold War. For decades, the American public was told these men were harmless scientists who had reluctantly served the Nazi regime. This was a lie of staggering proportions. The story begins in November 1944, in the smoldering ruins of Strasbourg, France. American soldiers had just liberated the city, and among the chaos, a Dutch-American physicist named Samuel Goudsmit was ransacking an upscale apartment. The apartment belonged to Dr. Eugen Hagen, a German virus expert who had fled when Allied bombing grew too intense. On the wall hung a photograph of Adolf Hitler. Nearby sat a cabinet filled with thick files that would change everything. As Goudsmit read through the night, he discovered the Nazis had developed biological and chemical weapons far superior to anything the Allies possessed. More horrifying still, they had tested these weapons on prisoners in concentration camps. One memo, dated November 15, 1943, coldly stated, 18 died in transport. Only 12 are in conditions suitable for experiments. It was signed with the standard Nazi salute, Heil Hitler. This cache of documents revealed what historian Annie Jacobsen called the most diabolical secrets of the Third Reich. The Nazis hadn't just committed genocide. They had turned human suffering into scientific advancement, using prisoners as laboratory rats to perfect weapons of mass destruction. 2 weeks later, Allied forces made another discovery that would reshape the post-war world. Near a magnificent castle in Germany, they found a launch pad containing a V-2 rocket with a 2,000-pound warhead. This missile could fly 5 times the speed of sound and had already devastated London. The British military, terrified of these unstoppable weapons, realized the Germans were years ahead of Allied technology. The genius behind these rockets was Dr. Wernher von Braun, a charismatic 32-year-old who would one day become NASA's most celebrated scientist. But in 1944, von Braun was a major in the SS, Hitler's elite paramilitary organization. He had personally attended meetings to request more slave laborers for his rocket factories, where an estimated 20,000 prisoners died, building the weapons that would later carry American astronauts to the moon. The moral calculus was brutal in its simplicity. Hang these men as war criminals, or hire them to build America's future. The decision-makers chose pragmatism over justice. General Jerry Bassett, who led the U.S. rocket program, knew the Germans were leagues ahead of American technology. Acquiring their expertise would save millions of dollars and potentially years of development. More importantly, it would prevent the Soviet Union from gaining access to these scientific treasures. The race for Nazi scientists had begun, and America intended to win. The crown jewel of this recruitment effort was the underground rocket factory, known as Mittelwerk, or Middle Works. Hidden beneath a mountain in central Germany, this facility represented the pinnacle of Nazi engineering and the depths of human cruelty. Nearly 60,000 prisoners from across occupied Europe had been forced to build V-2 rockets in cramped, airless tunnels. They worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week with minimal food or water. When they collapsed from exhaustion, they were beaten or shot. When they died, their bodies were burned or thrown into piles like garbage. Arthur Rudolph, the future NASA hero, had overseen much of this operation. He was described by American interrogators as 100% Nazi and a dangerous type. Yet within months, he was working for the U.S. Army. The walking skeletons who had died building his rockets were forgotten. What mattered was his expertise in rocket assembly. The Americans faced a significant problem. How do you bring Nazi war criminals into a country that had just fought a war against fascism? The solution was Operation Paperclip, named for the paperclips attached to files containing the most damaging information about these scientists, information that would never reach the State Department. Intelligence officers systematically altered background reports, removing references to Nazi party membership, SS service, and war crimes allegations. Men who had been described as ardent Nazis became reluctant participants in Nazi programs. War criminals became valuable assets for national security. The deception extended to the highest levels of government. President Truman had explicitly ordered that no active Nazis or war criminals be brought to America. His own intelligence agencies ignored these directives, bringing in hundreds of men who fit both categories. When questioned later, officials claimed these individuals had slipped through the cracks. In reality, they had walked through an open door. Dr. Hubertus Strughold exemplifies the moral complexity of Operation Paperclip. Known today as the father of space medicine, Strughold pioneered research that kept pilots alive at high altitudes and astronauts safe in space. NASA named a research center after him, and he received numerous awards for his contributions to American science. But Strughold's expertise came from experiments conducted on prisoners at Dachau concentration camp, where inmates were subjected to deadly, high-altitude chambers and freezing experiments. Many died in agony, their suffering transformed into scientific data. When American investigators discovered evidence of these experiments, they were horrified. Dr. Leo Alexander, who would later help write the Nuremberg Code governing medical ethics, called it a maelstrom of depravity. Yet Strughold was quietly brought to America, where he spent decades advancing aerospace medicine while his past remained buried in classified files. The biological weapons experts presented an even darker chapter. Dr. Kurt Blome had overseen Nazi Germany's biological warfare program, testing plague, typhus, and other deadly pathogens on concentration camp prisoners. After the war, he was tried at Nuremberg for crimes against humanity, but was acquitted, partly because American intelligence had already decided he was too valuable to hang. Blome was secretly hired by the U.S. Army and later worked with the CIA on projects that preceded the infamous MK-Ultra mind control experiments. In European safe houses, he continued conducting lethal experiments on prisoners, this time for American intelligence. The irony was staggering. The country that had helped write the Nuremberg Code was employing Nazi doctors to violate every principle it contained. The rocket scientists, meanwhile, were living comfortable lives at American military bases. Von Braun and his team were initially housed at Fort Bliss in Texas, where they worked on adapting V2 technology for American use. Despite being former enemies, they were treated as honored guests, earning substantial salaries while their Nazi pasts were carefully concealed. The Germans complained frequently about their accommodations, describing American cities as uncivilized and demanding better living conditions. The audacity was breathtaking. Men who had overseen slave labor camps were critiquing American hospitality. Yet military officials bent over backward to accommodate them, knowing their expertise was irreplaceable. By 1950, the Cold War had intensified, and the demand for Nazi expertise grew even stronger. The Korean War prompted accelerated Paperclip, a program designed to bring the most valuable remaining Germans to America as quickly as possible. Background checks were further streamlined, and even convicted war criminals became eligible for recruitment. Otto Ambros, Hitler's favorite chemist and the man behind the synthetic rubber factory at Auschwitz, was serving an 8-year sentence for war crimes when American officials decided they needed his expertise. Ambros had personally negotiated with Heinrich Himmler to obtain slave laborers, paying 3 Reichsmarks per prisoner, essentially renting human beings to work them to death. Yet within years of his release, he was consulting for American chemical companies and advising the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. The moral compromises extended beyond individual scientists to entire networks of Nazi collaborators. The CIA secretly hired thousands of former Gestapo and SS officers as spies and saboteurs, spending over $200 million on what critics called a complete failure in intelligence terms. Many of these Nazi agents were double agents working for the Soviets, exposing over 100 CIA operatives and compromising American intelligence operations across Europe. Perhaps most disturbing was the continuation of Nazi-style human experimentation on American soil. At Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, approximately 7,000 young American soldiers were subjected to chemical weapons tests, often without their knowledge or consent. They were told they were testing treatments for the common cold. Instead, they were exposed to nerve agents, mustard gas, and hallucinogenic drugs. Many suffered long-term health effects, and some died. The experiments were conducted with the assistance of Nazi scientists, like Fritz Hoffmann, who had developed nerve agents for Hitler's war machine. The same expertise that had been used to murder prisoners in concentration camps was now being applied to American servicemen. The victims were told they were serving their country. In reality, they were guinea pigs in a continuation of Nazi medical research. The cover-up lasted for decades. When journalists began investigating Operation Paperclip in the 1970s, they encountered a wall of classified documents and official denials. The government claimed that only a handful of minor Nazi Party members had been recruited, and that all had been thoroughly vetted. This was demonstrably false, but the truth remained buried in classified files. The reckoning came slowly and incompletely. In the 1980s, the Justice Department's Office of Special Investigations began investigating Nazi war criminals living in America. They found hundreds of individuals who had lied about their pasts to gain entry to the United States. Some were deported, others lost their citizenship, but many had already died peacefully in American suburbs, their crimes never acknowledged. Arthur Rudolph, the NASA engineer who had overseen slave labor at the underground rocket factory, was forced to renounce his American citizenship and leave the country in 1984. He spent his final years in Germany, still maintaining that he had only followed orders. The moon crater named in his honor remains unchanged. The legacy of Operation Paperclip extends far beyond individual cases of injustice. The program established a precedent for American intelligence agencies to operate outside legal and moral constraints in the name of national security. The same logic that justified hiring Nazi war criminals would later be used to justify assassination programs, torture operations, and the overthrow of democratically elected governments around the world. More fundamentally, Operation Paperclip revealed the malleability of moral principles when confronted with strategic necessity. The same country that had fought a war against fascism, that had liberated concentration camps and prosecuted war criminals at Nuremberg, was willing to embrace those very criminals when it served American interests. The scientists themselves adapted remarkably well to their new lives. Von Braun became a media celebrity, appearing on television shows and writing popular books about space exploration. He was celebrated as a visionary who had helped America reach the moon, while his role in building weapons with slave labor was carefully omitted from his biography. When he died in 1977, he was mourned as an American hero. Today, the physical legacy of Operation Paperclip surrounds us. The rockets that carried American astronauts to the moon were direct descendants of the V-2 missiles that terrorized London. The medical knowledge that keeps pilots safe at high altitudes was purchased with the lives of concentration camp prisoners. The chemical weapons in America's arsenal were developed by men who had tested them on human subjects. The moral legacy is more complex. Operation Paperclip succeeded in its immediate objectives. America gained a decisive advantage in rocket technology and space exploration, while denying that expertise to the Soviet Union. The Apollo program, which culminated in the moon landing, was built on a foundation of Nazi science and engineering. Without Operation Paperclip, America might never have won the space race. But the cost was enormous. Justice was sacrificed for strategic advantage. War criminals lived comfortable lives, while their victims were forgotten. The principles for which America had fought World War II were compromised in the name of fighting the Cold War. Most damaging of all, the American government deceived its own people about the nature and extent of its collaboration with former Nazis. The full truth about Operation Paperclip may never be known. Thousands of documents remain classified, and many participants took their secrets to the grave. What we do know suggests that the program was far more extensive and morally compromising than the government has ever acknowledged. In the end, Operation Paperclip poses uncomfortable questions about the nature of American power and the price of strategic advantage. It reminds us that even democratic societies are capable of profound moral compromises when they believe their survival is at stake. The Nazi scientists who helped build America's space program were not anomalies or accidents. They were the deliberate choice of American leaders who decided that expertise mattered more than justice. The rockets that carried American flags to the moon were built by men who had once served Adolf Hitler. The medical advances that saved American lives were purchased with the suffering of concentration camp prisoners. The chemical weapons that defended American interests were developed by war criminals who escaped justice. This is the hidden history of American power. Brilliant, successful, and morally compromised in ways that continue to shape our world today. Subscribe to World War IIpedia and join us as we peel back the layers of deception to expose the real story of the war that changed everything. Because the truth about World War II is far more complex, disturbing, and fascinating than anyone ever told you.